Hey folks, welcome back to Military Forces Unleashed. Today we're diving into one of the most fascinating and controversial naval projects of the 21st century, the Fridtjof Nansen-class frigates. These ships were supposed to be Norway's high-tech answer to modern maritime threats, but they ended up becoming a cautionary tale about over-engineering, cost overruns, and the limits of what even the best tech can do when you ignore basic naval principles. Built for anti-submarine warfare, these frigates are packed with some of the most advanced sensors and combat systems in NATO's arsenal. But here's the kicker. Their radar is so good it could track a sneeze from 100 nautical miles away, while their hull barely breaks 3,000 tons. So if you're curious how a country with a coastline the size of Florida built such a small fleet with such big ambitions, stick around. This isn't just about boats, it's about budgets, bureaucracy, and whether expensive tech always equals effective defense. And before I lose you to another clickbait video about stealth jets, let me tell you something that might shock you. This ship was so overpriced that it ended up costing more per unit than a Boeing 737 MAX, and it can't even fly. It took nearly a decade to build 5 of them. Its radar system, so complex that only one other navy in the world uses it. And despite being designed to hunt submarines, it struggled against diesel boats that move slower than your grandma on a treadmill. Welcome to the story of the Fridtjof Nansen-class frigates, Norway's pride or its biggest naval mistake. Back in the late 90s, Norway had a problem. Its aging fleet of frigates couldn't keep up with evolving submarine threats in the North Atlantic. Russia was rearming, and Norway, a key NATO member with one of the longest coastlines in Europe, needed an upgrade. Enter the Fridtjof Nansen-class frigates. Named after the legendary Norwegian explorer and Nobel laureate, this class was meant to replace the older Oslo and Bergen-class ships. The plan was simple: build a small but capable ASW, or anti-submarine warfare frigate, equipped with cutting-edge radar and sonar, able to operate year-round in harsh Arctic conditions. But nothing about this project stayed simple. In 1997, Norway signed a contract with Spain's Bazan, now Navantia, using their Alvaro de Bazan-class frigate as a base design. However, the Norwegians wanted a lighter hull, better stealth features, and above all, the US-made Aegis combat system. Yes, that Aegis, the same system used on billion-dollar destroyers. That decision alone would end up shaping the entire program and blowing the budget sky high. Norway didn't just want a new frigate, they wanted the frigate, one that could punch way above its weight class. The result? A ship that displaces just under 5,300 tons fully loaded, smaller than many destroyers, yet carries one of the most powerful radars ever put to sea, the AN/SPY-1F. This radar, a scaled-down version of the full SPY one used on Ticonderoga cruisers and Arleigh Burke destroyers, gives the Nansen-class 360-degree radar coverage, tracking dozens of targets simultaneously in air and sea. But here's where things got weird. To fit the Aegis system, engineers had to shrink everything else. The propulsion? Just 2 diesel engines, no gas turbines. Not exactly thrilling for a warship expected to chase fast subs in icy waters. The armament? Light by global standards. One Mk-41 vertical launching system with 24 cells, in a firm mix of Evolved Sea Sparrow missiles, ESSM, SM-2MR surface-to-air missiles, and Harpoon anti-ship missiles, which have since been retired. No Tomahawks, no stealth drones, just a lot of hope and a very expensive radar. Now, don't get me wrong, the Nansen-class frigates aren't bad ships. In fact, they're quite impressive on paper. They carry the Captus 1 towed array sonar system, one of the most sensitive low-frequency sonars in the world. Their stealth profile reduces radar cross-section, and their automation keeps crew numbers down to around 120 sailors. But again, there's a catch. Because of their limited displacement, these ships can't carry large amounts of fuel or ammunition. Their top speed is capped at around 26 knots, not exactly blistering. And their lack of helicopter hangars? Yeah, that's a real issue when you're supposed to be in the ASW platform. Norway eventually retrofitted the ships with flight deck support for NH-90 helicopters, which helps, but it's still a temporary fix for a fundamental design flaw. And then there's the cost. Originally, each Nansen-class frigate was supposed to cost about $300 million. By the time the last one was delivered in 2017, the average price tag was closer to $600 million per unit, over double the initial estimate. That's more than a brand new F-35 fighter jet for a frigate. If you think building a warship is expensive, wait until you see the maintenance bill. Operating costs for the Nansen-class are among the highest in NATO for ships of their size. The Aegis system alone requires dedicated technicians, regular software patches, and access to US classified data. Norway had to sign special agreements with Lockheed Martin and the US Navy just to keep the system running. Training crews became a logistical puzzle. And then there's the question of relevance. With the rise of hypersonic missiles, unmanned platforms, and AI-driven targeting, does a small frigate armed with 20-year-old missiles still make sense? Some analysts say no. Others argue that in the right environment, like the Arctic or the GI-UK gap, these ships are still incredibly valuable. But here's the truth. They're too specialized to be versatile, too expensive to scale, and too fragile to survive in contested environments. Let's break this down with cold, hard facts. Class: Fridtjof Nansen-class frigate. Country: Norway. Ships built: 5. Builder: Navantia, Spain, with Kongsberg, Norway, handling systems integration. Displacement: 5,290 tons full load. Length: 132 meters. Beam: 16.8 meters. Propulsion: CODAD. 2 times MTU 20V 8000 M71L diesel engines, 2 shafts. Speed: around 26 knots. Crew about 120. Radar: AN Spy-1F Aegis. Sonar: Captaz-1 VDS. Weapons: Mk-41 VLS with 24 cells, Oda-Breda 76mm gun, torpedo tubes, and NH-90 helicopter support. So why did this happen? Simple. Norway wanted a mini Aegis ship without downsizing expectations. You can't take a system designed for 9,000-plus ton destroyers and squeeze it into a 5,000-ton hull without trade-offs, and Norway learned that the hard way. Despite their limitations, the Nansen-class frigates have seen real action. They've participated in NATO exercises, patrolled the Mediterranean during counter-piracy missions, and even deployed to the Persian Gulf. In 2016, HNOMS Helge Ingstad collided with an oil tanker near Bergen, a disaster that exposed major flaws in situational awareness and crew training. The incident was so severe that the ship had to be scuttled due to structural damage. Total loss, one of only 5 in the fleet. This wasn't just a bad day at sea, it was a systemic failure involving navigation errors, poor watchkeeping, and flawed risk assessment. And no, that wasn't the only headache. The Aegis system, while powerful, requires constant software updates and operator training, something Norway struggled to maintain. The radar is so sensitive that false alarms were common during early deployments. Also, the lack of missile reload capability made sustainment in long operations tricky, and with only 24 VLS cells, these ships can't afford to waste shots. Still, when they work, they really work. In NATO-led ASW drills, the Nansen-class has demonstrated solid performance against simulated submarine threats, showcasing its Captus-1 sonar system's capabilities. So yes, they can hunt subs, but at what cost? What's next for the Nansen-class? Norway plans to keep them in service until the 2040s, with ongoing upgrades to radar software, communications, and possibly adding new missile types. But let's be honest, these ships were built for a Cold War-style submarine threat in the deep Atlantic. Today's wars are fought differently. Drones, swarms, cyber attacks, and AI-guided torpedoes are changing the battlefield. And while the Nansen frigates are smart, they weren't built for that kind of war. So unless they undergo a complete overhaul and another round of massive funding, they'll remain relics of a past vision of naval power. Unless major upgrades come online, they won't dominate future high-intensity conflicts, but they'll still serve as key assets in regional defense and NATO operations for years to come. At the end of the day, the Fridtjof Nansen-class frigates are both a marvel of engineering and a warning shot across the bow of modern navies everywhere. They prove that money doesn't always equal effectiveness, that technology can outpace practicality, and that sometimes trying to build the perfect ship ends up giving you a boat that's too delicate to fight. Still, give Norway credit. They tried something bold. They built a frigate that punches above its weight, and in the unforgiving waters of the North Atlantic, that counts for something. So if you enjoyed this deep dive into naval ambition gone wild, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell, because we've got more stories coming from the edge of the battlefield, the edge of the budget, and sometimes the edge of sanity. Drop a comment below. What would you change about the Nansen-class? Would you redesign it, or scrap the whole idea and start over? Until next time, stay sharp, stay curious, and remember, in naval design, bigger isn't always better, but cheaper sure helps.